The Christmas tree lights flickered like they were breathing, casting long, trembling shadows across the room. I woke with a thud in my chest, every nerve alight with panic, but my body wouldn't respond. My eyes darted to the foot of the bed, and there it was, or maybe it wasn't, something crouched, shapeless, watching. The soft tick of the clock seemed deafening, each second stretching like a cord around my throat. Outside, snow scraped against the windowpane, a gentle rhythm that only made the silence inside feel heavier. I wanted to scream, but my lips wouldn't obey. My heart pounded a frantic, uneven rhythm, a warning I couldn't voice. A whisper slithered through the room, curling around my ears. "You can't leave, not tonight." The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It was just wrong. The kind of sound that lodges itself inside your bones. I tried to move my fingers, my toes, anything. Nothing. The air felt thick, sticky, pressing against my chest. I could sense it creeping closer, a presence that smelled faintly of pine and something older. Something rotten beneath the holiday cheer. The lights blinked violently, and the figure seemed to shift, closer, almost tangible. I blinked, and the room went dark. And then I realized, the Christmas night had only just begun. The morning after that first night, the snow outside had softened into a dull, muffled white. Frost clung to the edges of the windows like fragile lace, and the low hum of the heater did little to warm the chill pressing against my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the tree lights still glowing faintly, their flicker now more comforting than menacing. But the memory of the previous night, of being pinned, of that whisper, refused to fade. Breakfast was silent, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. My sister stirred her coffee slowly, her eyes flicking toward me every few seconds. "You were muttering in your sleep again," she said, voice flat. "And screaming. Do you remember?" I forced a laugh. "Dreams. Just a bad dream." But the sensation lingered, that same oppressive weight on my chest, the faint prickling at the back of my neck, as though something unseen had been watching me all morning. The day went on with the trappings of normality. Wrapping last-minute presents, the smell of cinnamon and pine drifting from the kitchen, but I kept noticing small, unsettling things. The ornaments on the tree seemed slightly off. A candy cane hung crooked, as if nudged. A stocking fell from the mantel, even though no one had been near it. Shadows stretched in ways they shouldn't, lingering longer than their sources warranted. By mid-afternoon, I found myself wandering the house alone, tracing the creaks in the floorboards, listening for sounds that might not exist. The house was quiet except for the wind scraping against the windows and the occasional jingle of distant sleigh bells from a neighbor's decoration. And then, in the hallway, I froze. A faint scratching sound, almost like nails dragging across wood, echoed from the basement. My heart lurched. "Hello," I called, voice trembling. No reply, only silence that felt too thick to move through. Later, when my parents and sister gathered in the living room, I tried to shake off the unease. They laughed at silly holiday jokes, the kind that should have been comforting. But even their voices seemed warped, echoing with a subtle, almost mocking resonance. That night, I lay in bed, trying to convince myself that the morning's events had been coincidence. The room was dark, save for the glow of the tree. I pulled the blanket close around my shoulders, willing sleep to come, yet dread coiled in my stomach like a living thing. And then it came, the familiar paralysis. My body refused to obey. My chest tightened as if weighed down by an invisible force. Eyes wide, I felt the air shift, the temperature drop. Somewhere in the corner of the room, I sensed it. Something waiting, crouched, patient. "You can't hide," a whisper hissed, so close it felt like breath against my ear. I wanted to cry out, to move, to run, but every part of me was trapped. The shadows in the corners deepened, thickened, swallowing the glow from the tree. I could almost make out shape-shifting, indistinct, fluid, wrong. Then, a faint movement by the window drew my gaze. Something was there, just beyond the frosted glass. At first, I thought it was a reflection. But it wasn't. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it tilted its head in a way no human should. Its presence filled the room, pressing down on the air itself. I closed my eyes, willing the nightmare to end. When I dared open them again, nothing had changed. The tree lights flickered, and I felt a cold touch graze my arm. I bolted upright, heart hammering. The room was empty. I told myself I was imagining things. Sleep paralysis, exhaustion, stress, anything to rationalize the fear. But the feeling persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. And as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I realized something that made my stomach drop. This had happened before. Every Christmas for as long as I could remember. And each time it came closer. Tonight I thought tonight it would come again. And for the first time, I wasn't sure I'd be able to wake up. The nights grew longer after that first morning. Each day, the unease I carried seemed to seed itself into the walls of the house. Even in daylight, shadows lingered in corners, clinging to the edges of furniture. I began noticing things I shouldn't have. A chair slightly turned in the living room, ornaments nudged as if brushed by unseen fingers, the faint outline of footprints across the frost outside the window when no one had been near. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence. Childhood memories of bad dreams and holiday excitement could be distorted. But then the whispers began. Soft, almost drowned by the wind and distant church bells, but unmistakable. They called my name. Sometimes multiple voices, overlapping, indecipherable yet filled with intent. "You shouldn't be awake," they murmured one evening as I sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, attempting to write down what I remembered. I froze. My pen hovered above the page, trembling. "Who's there?" I whispered. The house remained silent, except for the whisper that seemed to circle me, retreating into the walls, dissolving into nothing. Determined to understand, I began researching. The internet yielded little. Forums filled with anecdotal claims of sleep paralysis during winter, blurred accounts of figures standing over beds, but nothing concrete. Old family journals told more. One, in particular, caught my attention. Handwritten in faded ink, dated over 70 years ago, a great-aunt described the same experiences I now lived. On Christmas Eve, it comes. I wake, pinned and afraid. I see it at the foot of my bed. I cannot move, I cannot call. And yet, I know it watches, patiently, always waiting. The language was eerily precise, as if she had been there, facing the same weight pressing down on my chest. And then came the warnings from neighbors. Mrs. Caldwell, the elderly woman who lived across the street, cornered me in the snow one afternoon. Her breath puffed out in small clouds, and her hands shook around her coat. "You've seen it, haven't you?" she asked, voice quivering. "It comes for those who wake too easily. For those who try to fight." I don't understand," I stammered. Her eyes darted behind me, to the empty street. "Don't sleep alone. Don't let it near the bed. And never, never let the lights go out." Her words were cryptic, but they rooted themselves in my mind. That night I stayed awake. I refused to close my eyes. The room became a prison of flickering shadows and creeping cold. Every creak of the floorboards sounded amplified. Every gust of wind rattled the window pane like knocking fingers. When I finally succumbed to exhaustion, it came as always. I woke. No, I was awake. Trapped in my body, paralyzed. The shadows gathered at the edges of my vision, slowly crawling closer. And then I saw it clearly. The figure, impossibly thin, elongated limbs that bent at impossible angles, head tilted unnaturally. Its face was hidden, but the presence radiated something ancient, patient, cruel. "You've stayed awake too long," it whispered, voice sibilant, brushing against my ear. I struggled to scream. My chest heaved, yet no sound emerged. The room seemed to expand, the corners receding into infinite darkness. The lights on the tree flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows that leapt across the walls. I felt its breath on my face, cold as the grave. The next day, I noticed the marks. Small scratches on the walls where its fingers or claws had pressed. A faint smear on the window pane. Things I could not explain, proof that it was real. And it had been there while I slept. I began questioning my sanity. Each night I tried to prepare. Lights left on, doors locked, talismans from old journals placed around the bed. Nothing worked. Every night, the paralysis returned, closer, stronger, more deliberate. I started losing track of time. Days blended into nights. Meals went cold. Conversations became fragmented. My family noticed. "You're not sleeping again, are you?" my sister asked one evening. Her tone wasn't accusatory. She was genuinely concerned, but her eyes betrayed fear. I can't," I admitted. It comes every Christmas Eve." Her face paled. "You mean like the stories?" "Yes," I whispered. "Exactly like them." That night, I tried to record what happened. I set up my phone, hoping to capture movement, sound, anything. The camera caught shadows flitting along the ceiling, the faint flicker of lights, and something crouching at the foot of the bed. But when I paused to look, the image was blurred, distorted, as though it had resisted being recorded. It whispered then, louder, almost mocking, "You think you can fight me?" I woke screaming, soaked in sweat. The recorder had stopped. The room was empty. But in the morning, the footage, fragmented, glitching, showed fleeting glimpses of the figure. Its presence was undeniable. I consulted more sources. Ancient folklore, local legends. There were stories of a spirit that visited on winter nights, preying on those trapped between wakefulness and sleep. The Watcher of the Hearth, they called it in hushed tones. Those who saw it rarely survived unscathed. Some vanished, some went mad, and some were marked. As Christmas approached again, I noticed the pattern. The episode started earlier, lasted longer, and its whispers became intelligible. "You cannot leave," it said. "You belong to this night." My paranoia grew. I stopped leaving the house. I avoided mirrors and shadows. I slept with lights blazing. I tried to speak to anyone who would listen, but words failed me. Friends dismissed my experiences as stress or imagination. The turning point came one evening when I ventured into the basement, drawn by a faint, almost imperceptible scratching. It seemed to beckon. The air was damp, suffocating. Boxes stacked in corners looked distorted, like they bent under unseen weight. And then I saw it, etched into the wall in faint, almost imperceptible scratches. Names, dates, symbols. The markings were old, predating my family. Some were recent. It had been here waiting, observing, patient. That night, as the final Christmas Eve approached, I lay in bed with every precaution. But when the paralysis came, it was different. Not distant, not crouched in the corner, not whispering from afar. It was at the foot of the bed, taller, broader, filling the room. Its presence pressed down like gravity itself. The shadows weren't just shadows, they were extensions of it, reaching toward me. And I realized, this time, it wasn't content to watch. Christmas Eve had come again. The house was silent, unnervingly so. Outside, snow fell in heavy, muffled drifts, blanketing the world in deceptive calm. Inside, I sat in my room, lights blazing, monitors and recordings around me, talismans and charms from old journals scattered across the floor. Every precaution I had taken in the past years, every ward, every charm, every bit of folklore I could remember, felt insignificant. It started the same as always. My body stiffened, my chest compressed, my eyes wide and unblinking. I was awake and trapped, incapable of movement. But this time, it felt different. The presence didn't linger in the shadows. It was in the room, filling it entirely, pressing down on the air, on the walls, on me. "You've waited too long," it hissed, a voice that was neither whisper nor growl, a mixture of both, curling around my ears like smoke. I tried to move my arms, scream, even blink, but my body refused. The lights flickered violently, shadows twisting unnaturally, warping around the corners of the room. The Christmas tree seemed to stretch, its ornaments elongated and grotesque, the colors darkened into something ugly and unnatural. I could feel its gaze, something ancient and patient, boring into my mind. My thoughts became jumbled. Panic tangled with despair. Memories of past nights flashed in fragments. The first paralysis, Mrs. Caldwell's warning, my great-aunt's diary, the whispers, the scratches in the walls. Every warning, every clue, every fear coalesced into a single unbearable truth. This entity was unstoppable. It moved then, or perhaps I perceived it as movement. The darkness at the foot of my bed rippled, thickened, and the temperature dropped sharply. I could feel its hands, or extensions of it, sliding over my arms, my chest, tracing invisible lines, marking me, claiming me. "You can't leave," it breathed, close enough that I could feel the cold hiss against my skin. "Not now. Not ever." Desperation surged. I tried to speak. "Leave me, please." My lips quivered, but no sound came. I tried to push with my mind, willing my body to respond, but my body was gone. I was a prisoner of my own skin. Time fractured. Seconds stretched into eternities. The shadows didn't just move, they stretched, crawling over the walls, the ceiling, engulfing familiar objects into alien shapes. The room itself seemed to bend, elongating in impossible angles. My bed became a chasm, the lights on the tree flickering in pulses like a dying heartbeat. Then I heard whispers. Dozens, hundreds of them, each layered over the other, unintelligible yet unmistakably malicious. "You are ours. All of you. We wait." And I saw faces, brief, fragmented, reflected in the ornaments and windows. Faces twisted in fear, agony, despair. They blinked in and out, snapshots of victims who had come before me, tethered to this night. I tried to close my eyes, thinking perhaps blindness would free me, but closing them only made it stronger. Its whispers turned to laughter, low, cruel, echoing inside my skull. I could feel it pressing in, the very walls of the room bending inward. Desperate, I remembered something my great-aunt had written. "Do not fight it. Let it pass, or it will break you." But my survival instincts screamed otherwise. I tried to scream, tried to strike, tried to push with everything I had. The entity reacted. Its form, now partially visible, swirled, solidified, elongated. Limbs bent impossibly. Shadows merging into sinewy shapes that slithered and coiled around the bed. Its face, or the absence of one, hovered over me, and I felt an intimate, horrifying knowledge of my own life, my fears, every shameful thought and secret regret. "You belong to this night," it hissed, voice twisting into something that sounded like 1,000 whispers at once. And then, something inside me snapped. I couldn't move physically, but in my mind I screamed. I relived every Christmas Eve from my past, every sleep paralysis, every warning. The entity recoiled, as if sensing my recognition of its own patience, its inevitability. Yet it did not leave. It whispered closer, brushing against my cheek, colder than snow and sharper than knives. My mind reeled with visions of shadowed forests, abandoned halls, and figures crouched at the foot of beds. I realized then that this wasn't just a spirit or a hallucination. It was a force woven into the very nights of Christmas, feeding on fear, patience, inevitability. "You cannot fight," it said, voice curling around my throat. "You cannot run. You are mine." The room collapsed into darkness, lights extinguished. The tree's ornaments shattered into shards of shadow. I felt myself pulled toward the foot of the bed, my mind dragged into that impossible chasm the entity had opened. Time fractured completely. I was suspended between the living world and something else. And then, faintly, a memory. My sister's voice, Mrs. Caldwell's warning, the diary entries. Clarity pierced through panic. I focused on breathing, on noticing, on being. The shadows paused, curious, testing. The entity hesitated, its presence undulating. But it wasn't gone. Not really. I woke, or I thought I did. My body shook violently, sweat-soaked, heart hammering, yet the room was still. Lights normal, ornaments intact. The house silent. Too silent. I sat on the bed, chest heaving, trembling. And then I noticed it. A faint shadow lingering near the corner of the room, unmoving but watching. And the whispers, the faintest, almost tender murmur, barely audible, lingered in my mind. Until next year, we wait. The paralysis had ended, but the terror, the inevitability, remained. I was still here, but part of me had been claimed. The morning after, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Snow covered the world outside in soft, pristine white, muting every sound and lending a false sense of peace. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the tree. The lights blinked softly, their steady glow almost comforting. yet I couldn't shake the weight that pressed on my chest, not physically but in the marrow of my bones. Everything seemed normal. Breakfast was prepared. My sister hummed a Christmas tune, pouring coffee with a practiced hand. My parents moved about with small, ordinary tasks. Cleaning, arranging dishes, chatting in low tones about holiday plans. Nothing appeared out of place. Nothing, that is, except me. I could feel it lingering. The entity hadn't vanished. Its presence hung like a shadow at the edge of perception, a subtle pressure that grew heavier the longer I moved through the house. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, residue from the nights of terror, a hallucination of exhaustion. But the marks remained, faint scratches on the wall, smudges on the windowpane, tiny distortions in the reflection of the ornaments. "Are you okay?" my sister asked, her voice hesitant, almost afraid. I think so," I whispered. The words sounded hollow, even to me. She didn't press further, but her eyes betrayed something unspoken, a recognition that whatever I had faced the night before had left me changed. Not visibly, not in ways others could touch, but in the small tremors in my hands, the hollow set of my jaw, the way my gaze lingered too long on empty corners. I tried to move past it, to act normal, to bury myself in holiday routines. I wrapped presents, poured drinks, laughed at jokes I'd barely heard. But every creak, every shadow, every flicker of the tree lights carried a memory. Every time I sat too long in silence, I felt it brushing at the edges of my consciousness, a cold whisper teasing the hair on my neck. Even in the daylight, it was there. I noticed shadows stretching unnaturally, corners that felt too deep, reflections in mirrors that didn't quite match reality. My own movements startled me. Did I move my arm, or did something else move it for me? My mind twisted with doubt. At night I dared not sleep. Or if I did, I kept the lights blazing, monitors running, talismans pressed close, and even then the paralysis came. Always lighter, always teasing, reminding me that it had not left. The entity tested its boundaries, whispering in the dark, fading into silence just before I could see it clearly. I found myself wandering the house in exhaustion, muttering fragments of words from old warnings. Do not wait. Watch, stay awake. The sense of inevitability settled into my bones. I knew the truth. The entity was bound to the night, to Christmas, to the moments between sleep and wakefulness. It was patient. It was immortal. It waited, and it would return. The following days passed in a haze. My family carried on as if nothing had happened. I smiled, nodded, and engaged in conversation, but my attention fractured constantly. My thoughts drifted to the nights ahead. I imagined the approach of Christmas Eve, the snow falling softly outside, the room growing dark, and the cold press of an unseen weight against my chest. I tried documenting my experiences, writing everything down. The words felt inadequate, incapable of capturing the dread, the intimate horror of being paralyzed under the entity's gaze. Even my notes seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking. A phrase altered, a line smudged, symbols I didn't remember writing. My dreams became nightmares. Shadows filled with faces I had glimpsed only briefly, voices overlapping, whispering my name, repeating phrases I had never spoken aloud. I woke screaming, body drenched in sweat, yet when I looked, nothing was there. Only the faintest hint of a shape at the corner of the room. By mid-December, I realized I was no longer just waiting for it. I was living in anticipation. Every flicker of light, every creak of the floor, every breath in the night became a signal. My ordinary life, the routines, the smiles, the family gatherings, were all filtered through the lens of fear, of the inevitable night ahead. Christmas Eve came again. I barricaded myself with every precaution. Lights blazing, doors locked, objects positioned around the bed according to every scrap of folklore I had recovered. I sat rigid, waiting. Hours passed. The house seemed empty, silent, ordinary. And then it came, the subtle press at the edge of awareness, the soft shift of air, the whispers curling around my ears. I froze. My chest tightened. My body betrayed me as always. The shadows lengthened. A coldness slid over my skin. It was here again, patient, inevitable. I lay there, paralyzed, eyes wide, heart hammering. And then, in the quiet, I understood. I was no longer just a victim. I was part of its cycle, another soul tethered to Christmas nights, a story to whisper in warnings, a name to etch into the scratches on walls. Morning came. The house appeared normal. My family moved about unaware. I sat on the edge of the bed, still trembling, still aware, still alive, but forever changed. And in the corner of my eye, a shadow lingered, unmoving yet watching. I dared not blink. A faint whisper brushed my thoughts. Until next year, we wait. I did not move. I did not speak. I only watched, knowing the horror was patient, knowing it would return, knowing that each Christmas night would belong to it, and to the part of me it had claimed. I had survived, but survival was hollow. Life continued, but I was no longer wholly mine. Every laugh, every candle, every carol carried the memory of the nights trapped, of the weight pressing, of the whispering presence that would not leave. And the snow outside fell quietly, masking the footsteps I could no longer ignore.